My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people that we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that sourcing and procurement plays in the way that we live. If you like today's episode, make sure to rate the program and give us a follow. And today, we have the pleasure of hosting a seasoned and accomplished procurement and supply chain exec, bringing with him to today's program nearly 30 years of experience as a practitioner in the procurement and supply chain space, serving as in businesses such as Eni, Alcoa, and most recently, the former VP of Global Procurement at Amcor, Francesco Bassoli. Francesco, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah,
I like the accomplished more than the seasoned, but, but thanks.
No worries, no worries. What does seasoned mean to you?
No, just joking.
No worries, no worries.
Pleasure for being here. Thanks for inviting me. It's procurement and sourcing is a great passion of mine, so I'm glad to be invited and having an opportunity to speak to you today.
We look forward to the episode as well, and that transitions nicely into a question that we ask a lot of our guests. What exactly does this space that you've been in for quite some time now, Francesco, mean to you of sourcing and procurement?
Sure. So I think very few of the people in my role have studied procurement. So most of us probably get into procurement at some stage through different venues. And then a lot of us then became passionate about it, and then probably they make their own career in procurement and they would never leave it. So first, for me, procurement and sourcing is a great passion. I've been here, as you said, for 20 plus years. I really enjoyed it. I'm an engineer, so I started probably in a different space, and I started working as an engineer, but then slowly transitioned into sourcing. But the second part that I say normally, it's a very critical function in many companies. I come from a world where when a crisis comes, the first person to be invited in the CEO room is the CPO, and then he's asked, how can you save the company? Now I'm making it a little more emphatic than it should, but definitely it's a very critical function for the company. Sometimes one of those functions that is not recognized as others. And I think the third one probably that maybe gets too close to the role is it's an opportunity to find partners. I think when you are in procurement, you manage the interface with the market, and then you really have to pick partners as much as our sales colleagues would do on their end. But it's a very important role to choose partners that will help any company to become successful in future. So I look at this probably in three ways.
It's a fantastic insight and a great answer to start things off. When it comes to the elements related back to procurement and sourcing, being kind of the little brother or sister in the organization, not being seen as somebody that's making a real value. You said it yourself, and of course you've worked in industries that, you know, it's heavy industrial industries. Direct materials have a lot of meaning to the bottom and top line of the business. So obviously those partnerships that you're forming are incredibly important. Why is it that procurement and sourcing has gotten this rap as being, you know, kind of seen as a secondary function within the organization, when in essence, especially in industries that you're from, it is so vital to the business?
It's a great question. I think many of us ask ourselves this question every morning. Listen, I think it's a fact. And it's not a sad fact that most of the CEO, most of the senior leaders, they look at growing companies. Most of the CEOs are paid for increasing the share value. And normally they will look at the opportunity to increase the top line. So sometimes some of the less, some of them would be looking at procurement as an important function, but probably not the top priority. I have met all kind of CEOs, and some of them actually look at it very differently. But in many cases, for me, and one of the reasons why we're looking at procurement that way is that it doesn't thrill investors normally. It doesn't thrill shareholder. And in many cases is not as critical as sales, for instance, in terms of growing the top line, which is an important factor for share value. So it's the way it is. I also though met and worked with a number of CEOs who would translate procurement performance into share value, into cents per share, and that makes our life so much different. And then so you do see all kind of range. But I think if you look at procurement, sometimes is look in a more tactical way, and that's for me the reason why. It's not always the same, but in many cases, I believe this is the reason.
Yeah. Interesting insights. What you said yourself, you come from an engineering background. Do you think that that has given you a unique entry point into the sourcing and procurement space?
I think one important factor for me in procurement to be successful is is looking at the procurement function not as a standalone. Sometimes we tend to look at that as the beginning and the end of the day, while I look at procurement as an important partnership function where you partner with engineers, with the production manager, even with sales, with finance. So because in procurement you buy material services, you connect yourself to partners. You have an open window to the buy market, and then you have a duty to also bring that buy market into the company. So to answer your question, I think definitely it gave me the insight on how engineers and production manager, which was my background, think about, and help me to understand how to better partner with them, because you're really serving them, and you should really have the mentality of my job today is actually serving those important stakeholders, but also challenge them in the way they do things and offer them option to be more successful at what they do. When I said before, you know, I come from a company where the CEO would call me first when the crisis comes. It was true for me in for instance in the Alcoa times, and he would always ask, give me option, give me tools to reduce my cost basis, and I will discuss and see how can I make that happen, because all those tools, all those options normally come with a risk attached to it. So you need to look at yourself as a business partner, and knowing how the other party thinks is critically important to succeed in a function like procurement.
Fantastic response, and also so important to push at. You are, as you said, the open window to the buying part of the business, but also the spider in the web that's able to connect partners, whether those be internal but also external partners in the form of suppliers. Super interesting. And you brought up some of your previous experience at a business such as Alcoa. You've yourself, from the businesses you've been at, Alcoa, Amcor, made some shifts, and some pretty significant shifts in industries. Again, always primarily working within rather industrial companies with a focus on, where the raw materials have and or products and services that you're purchasing have a real impact on, from a quality and sustainability perspective and alike. So there are some red threads between those industries, of course. But of course, oil, mining and metals, and then also now then your most recent in packaging. I mean, how do you resonate of what it is that you could take from each industry into the next industry that you work within?
Sure. I think it's a great question, and there are certainly a lot of commonality and a lot of distinction point in each of the industries. If you compare, for instance, metals, mining, and packaging, probably in terms of commonality, the few things that come to mind are the fact that the cost of revenue is very important. So you procurement manage 60-70% of the revenue fundamentally, and so it's so critically important. If you look at the structure of what you buy, again, the raw materials are 70 to 80% portion of that. So very, very important. And that goes back to the partnership. Choosing the right raw materials, it becomes so critically important for each of the company. Partnering between the internal stakeholders and your suppliers becomes so critically important. So definitely, even metals and mining is upstream. So it's one of the differences, though. If you look at packaging converts raw materials into products, so normally make a margin on the conversion part. So it's a fairly stable business, fairly fixed. Commodity market now, it floats with the market indices, so it's very unstable. So you are sitting in a role where the cost of your goods can fluctuate dramatically, so as much as the revenue.
Right.
So the structure of the two businesses is very different. While probably the cost, the way how you buy, and the composition of your of the goods and services that you buy is very similar. In terms of other differences, is the mentality for me. Commodity companies for me have been intensely investing in procurement and ensuring that they have an incredibly competitive cost structure. So they have been certainly investing in technology, in capabilities, in standardization, invested in simplification of the processes.
Right.
In my experience, the packaging industry, so midstream, as more invested into the product side and in being closer to the customers and offering flexibilities to customers, which brings complexity to procurement. So when you buy for a commodity company, you have done many years of simplification. So you have reduced the number of products that you buy, the services that you buy. You have standardized the service agreement. While on the midstream businesses, probably you're still facing a set of product that you buy in a dramatically different complexity, and so your effectiveness is very, very different. You, as a buyer, you tend to commoditize what you buy. You tend to simplify. You tend to create that value through simplification and creating competition on what you buy. In an environment like the midstream or the packaging one, where you haven't yet simplified what you buy, you still have to pay a premium for the complexity that you have in your portfolio. So I think there are some obvious commonality and some obvious differences.
Yeah.
And it's not related to people capabilities, more related to how the companies manage and how the company creates value to the shareholders. But you can start seeing, one where procurement is so central, and the other one where procurement is still very important, but probably follows more the revenue side of the business.
The one thing that's obvious, though, is that you've dared to change context a few times, and I think that is one of the aspects that's very interesting. It is, of course, interesting to be able to see where you can take experience from your previous and the differentiations between the two. Just on the piece of changing context, which I'm sure that some of our listeners are interested in doing, and or are down the line probably going to meet within their career as a fork in the road. First and foremost, a two-pronged question then: is it challenging to shift industry? And then the second part of that is, do you have any words of advice or encouragement for any of our listeners that are out there that would maybe themselves want to be able to change industry themselves?
Absolutely. So a short answer: it is challenging. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Of course, it's challenging, but it's also tremendously interesting. Because in the end, you will need to look at the world in a different manner. And again, first thing you need to think about is, what is the business priority? You're not doing procurement on your little mountain. You are a partner in a value creation chain. So certainly, it's important to understand what is important to the business. it is important to bring your experience and challenge things, the things you do. I think one of the role that we tend to forget sometimes in procurement is to be a challenger, is to continue to bring opportunities. I've seen a new material, I see a new service, I've seen different ways to operate in other companies, in our suppliers, in our clients. So it's an important role, and but I think we need to do it in a manner where it's a two-way conversation with our internal stakeholders, and we try to sit on their to put ourselves in their shoes, and then try to have this conversation about offering opportunities, but also listening to their challenges. Listen, if you look at my career, I've been changing many perspectives. So I am actually excited by change. I think people who have work in different domains, in different contexts, in different industries, should actually challenge themselves, even with lateral moves, to look at the world very differently. There's an enormous amount of experience and competences that you grow by looking at the world differently and looking at the function in a different manners. So I think I think for all the people who are thinking about it, I would encourage them to do it in a calculated manner. There's always some risk, but definitely it is challenging, but it's also very fulfilling. Once you can bring your experience, once you can bring your knowledge, and once you can merge it with the one of the new company where you're working, and you certainly will bring something new in your baggage, and then and offer something to your new employer. So I think it's a great opportunity. The roles, if you think about, are very similar, but how you do it is tremendously different. And so in just by tweaking it, I think we'll create a much more rounded professionals by having seen the function in different companies.
Yeah, it's a great bit of advice. And I mean, daring to change your current context, you do have to challenge yourself. One of the things that you mentioned there, though, of course, is that there is a calculated risk involved. And of course, procurement professionals are often pretty decent at being able to address averse risks, right? So I think that those that are interested in change, they could be able to calculate, challenge, and change the context. So it's great advice. And thanks for sharing that as well, Francesco. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about, something that I know that you're passionate about. Your LinkedIn profile describes you as a sustainable supply chain influencer. Can you describe what exactly do you feel like the mega trend of sustainability means for procurement as an industry moving forward, but also for the practitioners of procurement?
Sure. And thanks for the question. I am very passionate about sustainability. The first thing is probably everyone who has been attending procurement and sales meeting, I've been talking about sustainability more than price in the past 2-3 years. But then probably the actions are very different. Because then when the action became relevant, then we only talk about price and very little about sustainability. Sustainability is a mega trend that it's coming forward. It's already there. And then companies are very aware that will have an impact on the way they will operate in the next few years.
Right.
Of course, probably today there's a little more theory than practice, but definitely it's a very important element that we need to consider. Sustainability starts as a company priority and not as a procurement priority. But as procurement is the window to the supply market, I think there's a very important responsibility there for procurement practitioner. The first is to influence your supplier. Normally, and then pick one element of the big sustainability aspect, which is the environmental part. If you look at the scope 3 emissions, so carbon emission, normally 80% of the emission come from the material that we buy. So you procurement practitioner, you are influencing that part, and your company will never succeed unless you are successful in influencing the suppliers.
Right.
So first is you have an important role in influencing the marketplace and your suppliers in making sustainability a priority. But the second, though, is again bringing practices, bringing knowledge into your company, because in the end, normally the consumer are those who are running the show and those who probably will have to bear some of the costs of sustainability. And so normally the sustainability agenda is set by the sales colleagues. But you in procurement, you are interfacing a much larger market where things happen, where best practices are happening, where you know where you can learn from consultants from the whole marketplace about what good can be done in sustainability. So I think you have those at least two important duties that you have to bring forward, and and then I can go on and on in each of them. But definitely, it's very important that procurement practitioner remember their duty. Your duty is not to buy cheap, but it's also to bring that depth from the marketplace into your company. And then I think we have a duty also, because of the luxury to interface the market, to be a little ahead of the company in terms of practices, a little pushy. One of the natural elements of procurement is always being a couple of steps ahead of the company, because anything we buy right now will be used in 6 months or a year.
Right.
And definitely, if the company sets certain targets in 5 years, we have to think right now what needs to happen to make those targets possible, in terms of sourcing, in terms of influencing your suppliers, in terms of building the supply chains. So I think I think actually procurement is really well positioned for influencing the supply chain.
Yeah.
And then to think forward on how needs to be done, what needs to be done, and when to be able to achieve the company's targets.
And I think that you hit on something so central there, right? You are in a position of power and influence, right? You hold spend within a multinational organization when the context, at least that you've been coming from, and many of our listeners, and there is a great bit of responsibility that comes with that. Obviously, working in multinationals throughout your career, you probably have a decent view of this, but I'm just curious, like how can a business practically, if we do double click on the item of influencing a supplier base, right, the duty that you mentioned, how can a business practically lay the groundwork for sustainability topics, sustainable development within the supply chain, whether that be environmental or social?
So you have different levers, some sharper than others.
Right.
Of course, as always, normally the way you start is the communication part, is ensuring that every time you buy material, for instance, what we started doing is asking a few elements on the environmental side. Of course, the typical carbon content, recycle content. So try to understand how much circular material, in a way, it's embedded in the material, and then of course the social. You start creating certain parameters within which each supply has to fall.
Right.
And then in terms of governance, of course, you also create a certain element of governance. So the first thing is you communicate to the marketplace that this is the way we do business. This is what I expect from you, supplier.
This is the license to do business with us, pretty much, moving
exactly.
forward. Understood.
And then you provide a vision. So you say, well, this is where it starts, but I'm going to tell you that by 2035 or by 2050, I want to be carbon neutral, and then by 2035, I want to have a certain reduction in terms of those parameters. So you give them a roadmap. And then you start telling them, if you want to be part of my supply base, this is what you need to deliver, because this is what I need to give to my customers. And so this is how you can participate to my value chain. So first is communicating, which started probably maybe 5 years ago. Some companies, metals and mining, probably 10, 15 years, because it's so, in their case, environmental carbon intensive, and then you start screening them, and then you start, because the next element is to put, let me put it in a very procurement way, but in very monetizing the sustainability. So you start
Right.
saying, if your material contains more carbon than others, then for me as a discount product, and this is the value that I give to carbon, and this is the logic where I establish the value. And so you start creating maybe a soft environment first, and then you start creating a harder environment, and then you start acting on what you say. I think this is probably where we are right now,
Right.
with different level of maturity in different companies, because of course to be able to give a value to sustainability in broad sense means that you have done a lot of homework before to understand what is the value that you can transfer to your customers, and then understanding if your customers and then are willing to pay the value in addition, because
Right.
we shouldn't fool ourselves. Initially it comes at a cost, and then of course there's an opportunity to create value through creating some premium product, but of course they have to be recognized by the marketplace. You can't just decide that this is a premium product and everybody's going to pay the premium. So
Right.
logically, the supply chain, let's say the non-sustainable supply chain, have been optimized for 100 years. So now you need to create new supply chains that probably in 100 years will be competitive, but they start from a very different point. So obviously there is a premium today. I think we shouldn't fool ourselves, because if we do, then nobody will do anything.
No.
Because if we hear a lot of people saying that sustainable material has to cost the same as the non-sustainable. Not going to happen today. Not going to happen.
And yeah, potentially
So,
a naive outlook, right? I mean, a hopeful one nonetheless. But as you mentioned, right, to be able to get to that premium, somebody's going to have to pick up the tab when it's all said and done, right? It's either you as the buying side, it's the supplier within the materials or the products or the services they're providing, or it's the consumer, right? Somebody's got to bear the cost. You mentioned it before, but you also mentioned that when sustainability, as it's been the hot topic in the room during the last few years, but when price comes up on the table, that becomes the hot topic. I'm just curious, like,
absolutely.
how is it really that procurement can be able to sell into the organization that sustainability poses a competitive edge to the business in the end?
This is the most complex part of the conversation, and procurement shouldn't be thinking to resolve it alone. I think procurement is a lever for
Great
a
point.
business. It's very important. I think more and more companies are connecting sales and procurement, because this is where the whole conversation goes. Reflecting on, and there are instances where you can completely change the substrate, and then by changing the substrate, you can make it, let's say, more sustainable, and the cost doesn't change. But you have to completely change it, and then your customer need to accept to completely change the substrate. So it takes some qualification, it takes time. So anytime you have one of those topics, you have to connect very well with the sales teams, and bring in some finance person who help to do the math. But we shouldn't, procurement people, we shouldn't think that it's our duty to resolve it. It's a business complexity. It's not a procurement complexity. It's very important. I think our job has to be bringing the knowledge that we hear from the customers, and then creating a value chain where you are transparently talking about the constraints, the opportunity, and then bringing ideas to resolve it. But it's beyond procurement. That's very important to say. I think we shouldn't bring the idea. I think sometimes we look at it saying the cost of greener material has to be the same of the other. This cannot happen, but we should have sort of the broad mindset to offer options to the business, and finding solution along with the business. So it's probably it's not a great answer, but it's not a black and white solution, and each business will have to deal with the complexity and with the fact that solution have to be tailored, and then we have to accept that maybe in 10 years the solution will look simpler than they look like now. But now it's a time where you need to find solutions, and again, procurement is one seat at the table. It must have a seat at the table, but it's not the only one.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great point, and I think though it ties things together quite nicely, right? You've talked today about the fact that procurement needs to be a true business partner. And within that, you have to dare as well to challenge, but sometimes challenging also means offering options to the business. And should procurement make real headway and expect to develop things within a more sustainable supply chain, sometimes somebody's going to have to pick up the tab, but it is up to procurement. It's your duty maybe to show those options for a more sustainable path forward. But at the same time, it's a team effort, right? And it sits within a broader strategy, something that everybody needs to recognize. So I think that it's a great way for us to kind of tie things up here, as well as procurement needs to continue to be a true partner. And we really appreciate you coming on today's episode and sharing your insights with our listeners, Francesco. We would love to, before we let you go, to do something that we do with all of our guests, which is a little quick fire round, which we call our Kodiak moment. You might remember Kodak, the camera brand. They had their Kodak moment, capturing a nice moment in time. Well, we like to capture a little moment in time to get to know Francesco Bassoli, not only the procurement expert, but also the person, with a few quick questions, one word or one sentence answers. You ready to go?
Okay.
All right.
Let's go.
So I'm curious, what is a book that is sitting on your bedside table, or a podcast that you're listening to currently?
Oh, I'm reading a book which is on my. I'm actually reading. I don't know. It's sorry. It has to go. I'm reading a biography of Gorbachev, the former Soviet president. I'm in a period of biography, so I don't know. This is the one that I'm reading.
All right.
And podcast. I'm actually following a lot of history podcasts these days. I'm redoing all my history, so I'm first of World War, and I don't know why I ended up in this space, but this is what I'm listening.
I'm sure that there's some history buffs out there listening in that are cheering along as well as myself. So no worries on that. No reason to be embarrassed. I love historical aspects, especially war documentaries. Right now, I'm on a bit of a binge myself. So if you were going to have dinner, and maybe you're not allowed to say Gorbachev, but if you were going to have dinner with one person, alive or dead, who would it be?
Oof, alive or dead? No, certainly not Gorbachev. From the biography, it was not fun person. I don't know. I think I would for fun invite the former U.S. President Donald Trump. I think the guy, you may like it or not, but I think he's certainly entertaining. So definitely, that's where I would go.
It could be interesting to pick his brain, that's for sure. The last one, then, we have a Swedish saying, a paradrätt, which is the dish that you make somebody for dinner to be able to really impress, your go-to dish. If I'm coming over to dinner at the Bassoli household, what are you making for dinner, Francesco?
That's easy. So I'm Italian, so I would cook pasta, and my favorite one is with lobster. So lobster pasta, spaghetti all'astice. It's the perfect way to impress. I would definitely impress you, and my family will be happy to.
Looking forward to it. I just need to get over to Switzerland first. Thank you so much for taking the time to be able to be on today's episode. If people want to reach out to you or get in touch or learn about what you're doing, how could they be able to best do so?
They can do by email. I don't know if you can add my email, but it's very simple. name.surname@gmail.com. So happy to follow up with anyone who would be interested to connect.
And of course, a growing LinkedIn profile as well. So you can find Francesco there as well. But thank you so much for today's episode. Thank you for being on the episode. And I'm looking forward to the lobster pasta.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, you're invited.
Fantastic.